Answers in Genesis tries to defend their scientists by asking the question, can creationists be real scientists? Let's check this out.
Well, one of the questions that I get asked is, can creationists be real scientists? And that's something that I take rather personally as a creationist and as a scientist. Yes, of course, creationists can be scientists.
This guy is an astrophysicist. I find it fascinating that creationist astrophysicists exist. For me, the most compelling evidence that the universe isn't 6,000 years old, as creationists say it is the fact that we can see the birth of stars that were born 13.7 billion years ago. I'd love to hear this guy's mind go in circles trying to explain that. He'd probably say something stupid like God created the universe with the appearance of it being 13.7 billion years old.
And many of the scientists of the past have been creationists, and even in the present.
I don't see the relevance of scientists in the past being creationists. And I get the point about present-day scientists being creationists, but they actively have to deny science to be creationists.
I think of some of the greats of my own field of astrophysics. I think of Kepler, who developed the 3 laws of planetary motion. Kepler was a devout creationist, and yet you'll find his name in pretty much every astronomy textbook that's out there.
Who fucking cares? Everybody at that time was a creationist.
Because his contributions allowed us to predict the positions of planets much more accurately than had been done in the past. And he showed that planets sweep equal areas in equal times and developed the relationship between their period and the size of their orbit and so on. Really brilliant man, and he was a devout creationist, a young Earth creationist, by the way.
Who fucking cares? Everybody was a devout young Earth creationist because we had no evidence telling us that the Earth was older than 6,000 years. So we just took the Bible's claims at face value.
I think of Isaac Newton. There's a name that everyone's heard of. Everyone's heard of the great Isaac Newton, one of the most brilliant men who ever lived. And yet Isaac Newton was a devout biblical creationist.
Once again, who the fuck cares? At the time, very few scientific facts directly contradicted biblical teachings. Even geocentrism wasn't taught in the Bible. The Bible doesn't directly say that the sun spins around the earth. That's just how people interpreted it. So scientists could rationalize that away. Now we have direct facts that directly contradict the Bible. Like, for example, the sun was made after the earth and plants were made. We know how planets form. We know how life changes. And that directly contradicts what the Bible says. Instead of accepting scientific findings as fact, like they did with geocentrism eventually, you are trying to make what the Bible says fit science, and they just don't fit.
He didn't believe in evolutionary notions. He believed that God created the universe according to the scriptures. He believed that the world was thousands of years old, apparently, because he confirmed Bishop Ussher's chronology of the world, which is a few thousand years old.
Holy shit. The Origin of Species wasn't even released until like the 1860s, first of all. So the idea of evolution wasn't even around at the time that Newton was alive. And by confirming what somebody said about the age of the Earth, he was just doing his job as a scientist. They compiled the evidence that they had at the time and assumed that it was a certain age, so they put their names down on that. They had no evidence of an older Earth at the time.
And yet Isaac Newton was one of the greatest scientists that ever lived. He developed the laws of gravity and motion, and he formulated those laws and applied them to outer space, and was able to realize that planets orbit because of gravity and describe the nature of their orbits. He was able to prove Kepler's laws. Kepler had come along before Newton. And Isaac Newton he formulated the laws of gravity and motion and applied those to space. He basically developed the entire field of celestial mechanics. Brilliant mind.
Nobody said he didn't have a brilliant mind. That was kind of out of left field, wasn't it? Are you saying that Christians are generally viewed as mentally inferior?
Newton was able to figure out what causes the little purple rainbow and when we look through a refracting telescope, and he designed a solution, the reflecting telescope, that gets rid of that.
Yes, we all know Newton's accomplishments. Get on with it.
Newton developed the entire field of optics, co-discovered calculus.
I'm sorry, I thought you were done sucking his dick. Go ahead, suck it a little bit harder.
All these things were made up by this one man. He was a brilliant man and yet a biblical creationist. So of course scientists creationists can be real scientists. That's not a problem.
Sure, creationists can be scientists as long as they're living in a time period when science did not directly contradict their faith. Now that science contradicts their faith, they have to make a choice between believing what they can physically see or believing what some ancient book written by desert dwellers says.
After all, the methods of science really have nothing to do with evolution. They all come out of a creation worldview.
They all come out of a creation worldview. Is that what this guy just said?
So when evolutionists and creationists do science, we're really doing it the same way. We assume that the universe is testable and repeatable and rational and logical, and that our minds are able to understand the universe. And if I do an experiment the same way, I'll get the same result even if I do it 20 times. We expect this underlying uniformity of the universe, and it works.
But you deny the inevitable and obvious conclusions that stem from that work.
And so we're able to put human beings on the moon and develop computers and so on because we all believe in observational science.
Oh, here we go. The observational and historical science distinction. Let me tell you the only difference between scientists that believe in observational science and historical science. The people that don't believe in historical science are the people that deny the ultimate conclusions provided by observational science. Observation: continents move apart a few centimeters per year. Conclusion: they were once closer together. That's an inevitable conclusion. If they are currently moving apart, it means, by definition, they were once closer together. Instead, observational scientists say, you have no way of knowing they were closer. Maybe God created us all 6 seconds ago with the appearance of the continents having been closer together at one point.
When we talk about the past, we've left operational science and we're talking about origin science. And that's where you attempt to answer a history question using methods of science. And there's nothing wrong with that, but ultimately a history question would be better answered by consulting a history book.
Don't you dare fucking call the Bible a history book. And the real history books that we have, do you know where that information came from? Scientists. We don't have a history book written from 4.5 billion years ago. We have to rely on what we can discover and infer from science.
If I wanted to find out how long George Washington lived, the best way to do it would not be to take one of his buttons and radiometrically date it. The best way to do it would be to look it up in a history book. And that's really what the Bible is.
I knew he was going there. We have proved the Bible wrong 1 billion times over. Events that it claims happened didn't happen at all or were completely different than it claimed. Just one example is a passage about Moses parting the Red Sea and Pharaoh chasing him in his chariots. There was a satirical news article saying they found chariot wheels in the bottom of the Red Sea. Come to find out, there weren't. They went and looked. There isn't a trace of any of that happening. In fact, there isn't a trace of Moses even being a real person. These are just stories told down through generations. And I'm not even going to get into the game of telephone.
It's a history book that tells us when the universe began and how it came to be the way it is today.
No.
But that's why creationists and evolutionists come to different conclusions about the past, is because you see, we have a different view of history. We do origin science differently, but the way we do science in the present, operational science, is all the same.
Translation: we deny the inevitable conclusions drawn from the science that we do. In my eyes, that disqualifies them from being scientists, at least in certain fields. If they can't accept basic, established scientific facts because it contradicts what a 4,000-year-old book says, they have no place in the lab. Leave God at the door or get the fuck out.